Alright guys, so here's the second part of the tornado video, and one of the things I wanted to show you was an image of a Doppler radar station. It almost looks like a giant soccer ball on top of a tower. And what Doppler radar does is it gives the meteorologist the ability to measure rotation within clouds. And we can see clouds in the background. This is different than most radar. And radar usually can only sense if an object is moving towards it or away from it, kind of like a police radar gun. Doppler radar, though, has the ability to measure rotation. And here's a radar image. I think probably on Monday when I'm back, we'll take a look at satellite and radar images. And that's usually something I would do before talking about tornadoes, but it's a little complex, and I figured I'd rather just do it in person if I can. When we look at Doppler images, they're color-coded. And if well, on a map like this or a radar image, green indicates that the clouds are moving towards you, while red is moving away from you. So this can help us identify areas of rotation where a tornado is circulating. And here we can see that we have this area where there's a lot of clouds moving towards and a lot of clouds moving away. And it's in a very small area. And that kind of suggests that maybe this is rotation here. So this allows us to kind of predict where a tornado might be occurring on a radar image. There's an expression, get the red out, that used to be from like an old Visine commercial for eye drops, like to get the red eyes away. I don't know if they still have that ad or not, but that's how we used to remember it anyway, that red on a radar image means that things are moving away from you. Green means that they're moving towards you, and this indicates, because they're opposite each other, that the storm is rotating. And it's that rotational component that really defines a tornado. So if we look at the climatology of tornadoes, most of the world's tornadoes, over 90%, happen in the United States. For most of the country, tornado season is in the spring. And springtime, this time of year, is actually really tornado season. And it has to do with more extreme temperature gradient or more extreme temperature difference. In the south, in places like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, temperatures are really starting to heat up down there, while it's still quite cold in the north. Places like Minnesota and the Dakotas, it's still very cold. Wisconsin, still snow on the ground in most of those places. So because of that, we have a strong contrast in temperature. As we get full into the summer, even our northern climates start to warm up, and the odds of getting tornadoes decreases. It doesn't ever go away, but it just becomes less. So tornado season is typically in the spring, when we have a strong difference between cold and warm temperatures. Tornadoes tend to move towards the northeast, usually, because of the prevailing westerlies. They blow from the west to the east, and they often have like a northeast direction to them too. If we look at the data on past tornadoes, here we have annual average number of tornadoes from 1950 to 1995. So that's a pretty good stretch of time. And if we take a look at it, some of the states that might surprise you, Texas, we don't usually think of Texas as having a lot of tornadoes, but 124 tornadoes during this time. If we look at New York, we had 6, Pennsylvania 10, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine only 1 and 2 and 2, Rhode Island 0. If we look down at Florida, Florida actually has a surprisingly high number of 46. And that's actually because of its proximity to the water, because Florida is surrounded by the ocean. It sees more severe weather, more thunderstorms. There's a lot of humidity in the air, and that's why. 0 in Alaska, and that completely makes sense. But if we change the data, and now we look at annual average number of strong violent, so now that we're defining strong violent as F2 to F5 tornadoes for the same time period, now the numbers look pretty different. Nothing in New England. New York, we only had 1. The number in Texas had dropped dramatically. Now we only have 29 in Texas, only 7 in Florida. But Texas still sees a huge number of tornadoes every year. And, usually we think of Kansas, but tornadoes really happen in Texas a lot of the time. And we can really see the large number all throughout Tornado Alley, Nebraska and everywhere in the Midwest. Here we've got annual tornado count from 1950 to 1999. During this time period, there was a very strong tornado outbreak in the 1970s where we had a huge number of tornadoes in one year. And actually, this was mostly in one event. We had this really large tornado outbreak in the 1970s. These are tornado maps that you can get from the National Weather Service. And if we zoom in on one, what it's showing is from a time period of 1980 to 2004 now, tornadoes within this area. And these red lines, each red line represents a tornado, an individual tornado that occurred during this time frame in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, we can see that the general pattern is that the tornado, as it's rotating counterclockwise, tends to move towards the northeast. Maybe not every time, but much of the time. And again, this has to do with the prevailing westerlies and the jet stream in the United States. Typically, tornadoes have this northeastern movement to them. Not every time, there's an oddball one like down here, but for the most part, they have a northeastern pattern. I used to have more of these, but I took them out and I forgot to change the locations at the bottom. So anyway, if we look at the top 10 states for tornadoes, we can see over here Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, we've got Nebraska, we've got Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas as our top 10. So that's it for tornadoes. To summarize, when we look at the differences between hurricanes and tornadoes, hurricanes are much larger. They form over the ocean. Hurricanes typically do more damage just because they simply have a large area that they cover. A hurricane might be the size of several states. Tornadoes are typically smaller or always smaller. They are short duration events. Tornadoes might only last 20 minutes, half hour, maybe 2 hours tops. Hurricanes will last for several weeks before they finally dissipate. So those are some of the differences between hurricanes and tornadoes. And again, I didn't expect you to write down everything that we covered, but you should be familiar with some of these concepts. They will come back on the next exam on the Regents at the end of the year. So that's it for tornadoes.